Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Formula 1 is back in business with pre-season testing this weekend in Bahrain, but bad news for Aston Martin with one of their two drivers, Lance Stroll, out of the entirety of testing due to a cycling accident he has suffered in Spain. What does this mean for the team, who his replacement might be, what his future is in terms of recovery, and also could Fernando Alonso step in for the entirety of the weekend? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Certainly relevant to the topic as well is Aston Martin's set of reserve drivers, Felipe Drugovich, last year's 22 Formula 2 champion, and Stoffel Vandoorne, the Formula E champion from last year. They're both reserve drivers for Aston Martin this season. McLaren have, probably due to their relationships with Mercedes and the like, and McLaren Aston Martin with Mercedes, have gained access to Drugovich and Vandoorne's services in case they need to for the first 15 races. I don't know what McLaren's roster of reserve drivers looks like, but it's absolutely mega. They've got their own team. They've got other guys if they need them. They can get Nick de Vries if they want to do last season from Mercedes. And they've got the likes of Pato Award and others from their IndyCar selection. It's like absolutely mad what their roster is of potential reserve drivers. But these are the two names to keep in mind when we talk about potential Lance Stroll replacements over at Aston Martin. So the testing lineups are getting revealed by the teams. For example, Red Bull on the 23rd, on Thursday, of course. Verstappen will be driving the car for the entire day that day. Then on the 24th, they'll split it. Perez in the morning, Verstappen in the afternoon, and on the 25th, on the Saturday, it's just Perez for the entire day. Most teams have got to schedule something like this because you're not allowed both cars on track at the same time. Now, this is the big news, though, from Aston Martin just coming out, that Lance Stroll will miss the entirety of pre-season testing. This must be quite the accident, to be honest, to, well, ensure from their perspective that Lance will not be able to do anything at pre-season testing, because if he was potentially going to be okay, they would have said, okay, he's going to miss day one, or it's going to be a little bit unsure. But they've pretty much exclusively or outlined it very clearly that he will miss the entirety of testing, which of course is only one weekend out from the start of the season in Bahrain itself. Big deal for Stroll individually as well in terms of missing early practice time, which well, is very important for all the drivers getting all those laps in on track. So it's been confirmed he's going to miss pre-season testing due to an injury, and this is what Aston Martin say on their site. Whilst pre-season training on a bicycle in Spain, Lance Stroll was involved in a minor accident and sustained injuries, which will result in him sitting out the pre-season test in Bahrain. Lance is, however, expecting a quick recovery and a return to driving duties. His fitness to return to the cockpit will be assessed daily, and the team will issue an update ahead of the Bahrain Grand Prix. So pretty much confirming there's no way Stroll will actually be on track in testing next weekend or this coming weekend. He should be back for the Grand Prix, they believe. We'll see. The team wishes Lance a speedy recovery, looks forward to his usual energy and commitment in the team, and Lance Stroll gives a statement such as this: "Hey guys, unfortunate accident in prep for the season, determined to get back in the car and excited about the season, motivated to bounce back from this setback as quickly as possible." So yeah, big news. We seem to have something like this happen like every year. We've seen recently like Charles Leclerc goes rock climbing, and I'm sure that Fred Vasseur was like, please Charles, like don't do anything too scary or sketchy there to ensure that nothing bad happens before the start of the season. This must be, okay, they say a minor accident, which probably it was, but it must at least have some degree of severity, because a minor accident, you fall over, you graze your knee, like, you'll be all right to get in the car that weekend. There must be some, not serious injury or anything, but something that's going to stop him getting in the car for the next few days, which is quite a big deal, to such an extent that they say, look, Lance, you're not going to get any testing time in this car in Bahrain. You're going to go straight into practice one, presumably next weekend after that for the Bahrain Grand Prix, right at the start of March. Interesting coincidence in a way, given that it was roughly 2 years ago to the day that Alpine confirmed that Fernando Alonso had also suffered a road accident cycling in Switzerland. And there were concerns at the time, of course, about pre-season testing as it was back then, slightly later in the year to where it is this year. But, still a pretty similar timing, of course, his current teammate Fernando Alonso now. So tweet your thoughts on this in the comments. And also, the major setback for Lance Stroll individually is that not having this testing time is massively important for the drivers. We know that whenever there are like reliability gremlins for teams during the testing weekends, it usually kills at times their start of the season, or it can do, because they lack the testing, the drivers lack the experience in the car. Last year, for example, Daniel Riccardo didn't get to do any testing time because he was unwell. I think he had COVID or whatever exactly it was, but he was unwell last year, and Lando Norris did the entire weekend, I believe, of testing instead for him, and maybe that contributed in part to Riccardo not being as comfortable in the car at the start of the season. So maybe in a weird way, good news for Alonso, especially if Alonso was able to do the entire 3 days in the Aston Martin, which would be quite the, quite something to do physically, I suppose, but it seems like the drivers are more than willing and happy to do it, and potentially that's what they might do. We'll see what Alonso thinks about that, because of course he's getting on, but at the same time, he's probably equally passionate to the most passionate other driver on the grid. So Stoffel van Dorn, though, is competing in Formula E this weekend, so he can't really be there to replace Stroll. So in theory, Drugovich is the most likely man to replace Stroll in the testing, in the preseason testing. Of course, you can only have one car on track at one time, though, so there is a possibility, as Norris did last year in Bahrain, for Alonso to run all 3 days. I would certainly wouldn't rule this out, given Alonso's character, and it was done last year by Lando Norris, and even we'll see George Russell here suggest in a second that he wishes that the drivers could actually do that right, and it was allowed for them to do all 3 days on their own and have 20 cars on track as opposed to just 10 cars with one from each team, because he doesn't like it, the fact that they don't get any testing time really, because, you know, nowadays you don't have all this time pre-season like maybe you used to, and you've got very limited running to prep the car for the season. So definitely unfortunate for Lance Stroll individually, and also for the team themselves. Riccardo last year missed the day's testings due to illness, of course set him back a bit to the start of the season. I'm not saying you would have beaten Norris or anything had he have not missed the testing, but it is quite an important step of the season to get yourself familiarised with the car. So Aston Martin are expected to give their decision on the replacements over the coming days. I kind of feel like Alonso might just step in and do it for the whole weekend, especially because George Russell actually said in an interview that just came out really that he believes that all the cars should be allowed on the track. He reckons both teams, or all the teams, should be able to run both cars in testing and have 2 cars on track for all of the 3 days. He reckons the testing time nowadays is way too short. It's not just a Mercedes phenomenon, this. Mercedes have been the most vocal about it over the past few days, that they're frustrated with the lack of testing time they get, but Russell says, look, I wish that we could have both cars on track all 3 days, so we could each get 3 days of testing rather than just, 1.5 days of testing per driver. And probably a lot of the drivers agree that they'd like more time in the car before the season begins. So if Alonso agrees with that, and Alonso's willing to, he might just do all 3 days for Lance Stroll, which might well have some measurable impact on their relative performances at the start of the season. Of course, last year when Vettel was unwell during, I think it was the Bahrain and the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, they got Nico Hülkenberg in to replace Sebastian Vettel. Of course, this year, Hülkenberg can't come back for them again because he's in the Haas seat, right? So he's got his own duties to attend to this time around. Moving on from that, though, some various updates to bring you guys. Firstly, on the Honda side, I don't know what Honda have been thinking these last few years, to be honest, because they're now out of Formula 1 again, but they're coming back in 2026 for the new engine rules. They have stated that multiple teams have been interested in registering their interest with Honda to partner up with them. There's no concrete decisions yet, but I don't know why they didn't just stay with Red Bull, to be honest, especially because Red Bull Powertrains is now being called Honda Red Bull Powertrains, in kind of giving Honda more recognition for their involvement in the Red Bull power unit, but nonetheless, they're coming in with Ford in 2026. So, I don't know, Honda have fumbled the bag on this one pretty hard, and maybe it's not good for Red Bull either. I guess we'll see on that one down the line, at least. This season, it probably won't make too much difference, but Honda say they're going to be back in F1, but, exactly who they're going to be with, I don't know. Some teams are clearly interested, but Red Bull obviously have now moved on to different pastures, let's just say, with Ford. Also, a few updates around the grid for the new season. There's this new, if you guys hadn't heard about this before, I think I saw this mentioned one time, that there's a new experimental DRS rule where in sprint races only for now, they will activate the DRS 1 lap earlier. So usually you start the race, you do 1 lap, then you do 2 laps, and then by the time you get to the 3rd lap, that's when DRS is enabled. For sprint races, they will now do it from the 2nd lap of the race. Checo doesn't reckon it's going to make a massive difference, but nonetheless, they're going to try it in sprints, and then if it works well, I guess they could try it again in real races, and maybe they could try a similar thing after the safety car comes in, for example, which obviously has things in a pretty similar way as well. Also, big update on the Australian Grand Prix. I don't think there's anything massively new here, but just further discussions of a 4th DRS zone returning. You guys might remember when we went to Albert Park last year that there were initially 4 DRS zones. By the time they got to the weekend, though, they decided, let's go back to 3. So this is the track at Albert Park, if you guys are unfamiliar. I think it's a fantastic track, but for the modern Formula 1 cars, it's just a bit too tricky to overtake. It's single file a lot of the time. The overtaking zones are, at least like the DRS zones, let's just say, where overtakes are more possible, are a bit too short generally to make moves happen. It can be done, but it's quite tricky. Now, this is the back straight here. It's not, of course, a straight, right? The back curve, where I think the most opportunities really can arrive into turn 9. Now, this was potentially going to be a DRS zone, and they then said no. So there's 3 DRS zones. There's one on the main straight and one with the same detection points just before the final couple of corners down into turn 3. And then after the middle part of the lap, there's another DRS zone down to turn 11. But it's quite tricky to make an overtake happen here because, again, the straights are relatively short. Compare this, for example, to like Imola or something when you've got a massively long straight. You know, these are pretty short straights. The longest period of time where cars get to potentially make a move is actually on this section here towards the end of sector 2. And what they're saying is that maybe at another DRS zone here. Now, look, if a track requires 4 DRS zones to work in modern Formula 1, maybe it's not a great track for these current Formula 1 cars that we have. But nonetheless, that's what they're considering doing. Now, usually DRS, of course, are only active on straights. We have seen last year at Zandvoort in the Netherlands that they opened DRS earlier on the banking section to give the chasing car more of a chance to overtake into turn 1. I think that was quite effective. And yes, they were going around a corner, but there was banking there because when you open DRS, you lose drag, but you also lose downforce from the rear wing. The rear of your car becomes more unstable. So when you're going around a corner, that can affect the car and potentially create a dangerous situation. That's what they thought last year. Therefore, they decided we're not doing the 4th zone from turn 8 to turn 9. But they might change their mind on that because to me, with the new ground effect here we have and the way the cars are nowadays with all the downforce, I don't think that a DRS activation would really affect the handling and the stabilities of these cars to an extent, even going around a bit of a corner that is going to be, add too much danger. So I think it's worth considering having another DRS zone here because I think it generally could be a great overtaking opportunity into turn 9 if it was enabled, even if it was for just like half of this segment right here. But tweet your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.